Why is there a Guy Fawkes Street in Salford? Why would people think that Guy Fawkes stayed at a pub here in Altrincham? And what's Ordsall Hall got to do with it? A cave near the River Irwell named after a Norse god? What's that got to do with Guy Fawkes? Guy Fawkes was a nobody before the Gunpowder plot. So there was no Guy Fawkes Street here in 1605. So we're going to have to go somewhere else to unravel this mystery. Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. We all know that old story. Someone once said that Guy Fawkes was the only person to ever enter Parliament with honest, noble intentions, a clear agenda, and the resources to see it through. But did you know that Guy Fawkes might have stayed at this pub here in Altrincham? Altrincham has been around a long time, but everywhere has really, hasn't it? It's a market town, and that's something special. Not every town is allowed to have a market. It's now part of Greater Manchester, England, south of the River Mersey in the historic county of Cheshire. It's only about 8 miles from Manchester. There's evidence of prehistoric people here, and the Anglo-Saxons, and a Roman road cuts through town. The earliest documented reference to the town is from 1290, when it was granted its charter as a free borough by Baron Hayman de Massey V. I was digging around in the history of this area, and this story caught my attention. The Old Market Tavern that stands in Altrincham's historic Old Marketplace was formerly known as the Unicorn Hotel. The inn was run by the Eaton family from around 1600, possibly earlier, to 1675. But this really caught my attention. Did Guy Fawkes visit the Unicorn Inn? Local historian Alfred Ingram wrote, "It is a matter of surmise whether Guy Fawkes, after having been wounded at the little affair at Malpas, stopped at that ancient and still celebrated hostelry, the Unicorn, to refresh the inner man. Most probably he did, and drowned the sense of his injuries in libations of choicest canary." I think I know what libations of choicest canary mean, but it's one I've never heard before. But what's that all about? Guy Fawkes in Altrincham. 1605. 400 odd years ago. It's a long time ago. Can you imagine what this place must have looked like then? But this place was still a community then. The first recorded pub was in 1600, and that lines up with Guy Fawkes' time. So why would people say he stayed at the Unicorn pub? The notion comes from a novel written by William Harrison Ainsworth in 1840. His work was published alongside Charles Dickens and Oscar Wilde. He was actually the best-selling author of his time, but his work has not stood the test of time, and today it is largely forgotten. The Unicorn is not mentioned in the novel, but Altrincham is. Guy Fawkes is wounded in a sword fight, and they pass through Altrincham on their way to Salford. Harrison Ainsworth was born and raised in Manchester, and the story largely takes place in Manchester, Salford, and surrounding area. These places would have been well known to Ainsworth. The story starts at Manchester Cathedral with the execution of 2 Catholic priests. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but this is something we've talked about here before. In 1641, Edward Barlow, who later became Father Ambrose Barlow, the patron saint of Manchester, was executed for being a Catholic priest. This was during the time of the Reformation, a dangerous time for Catholics. They stuck his head on a pike on top of the cathedral. We've done a video about it. Check the description for a link. Anyway, that's another story. At this execution in Ainsworth's novel, an old woman who is some sort of prophetess gets into trouble and falls into the River Irwell. Guy Fawkes saves her and brings her to a nearby cave. When they reach the cave, the old woman tells Guy Fawkes she was born at Hume Hall in Manchester. Welcome to Salford. This is the Irwell, the River Irwell. And we just crossed over this little footbridge here. And just here on the other side of that footbridge, on the other side of the Irwell, was Hume Hall. And she wants to get one last look at Hume Hall before she dies. This is the curiously named Woden Street. And why would there be a street in Salford named after a Norse god? Well, I suppose why wouldn't there be? There are stranger things. But why Woden? Of course, Woden is Odin. We know him as Odin. But the Anglo-Saxons and the Norse knew him as Woden. The reason there's a street called Woden Street is because just up here was Woden's den. And it was an ancient cave that was covered inside and out with ancient runes. R-U-N-E-S, runes. Norse symbols and Norse gods, Anglo-Saxon imagery, and Christian imagery as well. It was in the early 1800s, it was destroyed. The man that owned the land didn't want all these antiquarians coming around his land, disturbing his peace. And I think he owned quite a bit of land. It wasn't like they were in his backyard. And he destroyed it. One account says he blew it up with dynamite. And that was in the early 1800s. So that was in the time of William Harrison Ainsworth. He would have known this well because he just lived over that way a little bit on King Street in Manchester, just about a mile away. So he would have known this area along the Irwell, hanging out around here as a kid for sure. And that's how it ends up in the story of Guy Fawkes. It was inhabited for millennia, I guess. There's even evidence, well, of course we can't verify any of this, that it was inhabited by ancient man. There were prehistoric artifacts attributed to the cave, but of course we can't verify any of this because the cave was blown up in the early 1800s. So that's kind of before modern archaeological practices. And can't verify that they came from the cave, but there's evidence of prehistory, Anglo-Saxon writings inside, and Norse writings, and early Christians. It was an early Christian hermitage, like monks or priests or whatever would live in there and be holy. There are a whole bunch of Norse gods in this neighborhood. Here we got Freya Grove, and Freya may be the origin of Friday. Woden's Day, is the origin of Wednesday, and Freya may be the origin of Friday, Freya's Day. Freya and Frigg get mixed up in Germanic and Norse mythology, so we're not really sure if it's Freya or Frigg Day. I'm hiding under the eave of a several hundred-year-old house. It's Ordsall Hall, and it's really pouring down now. A great deal of the story takes place here at Ordsall Hall in Salford, and it was all from the mind of William Harrison Ainsworth. He was a historical fiction writer, much like your Harlequin romance or your Mills and Boone, writers of today. He was friends with Charles Dickens, contemporary with Charles Dickens. They were good friends, traveling companions. Probably should say that Dickens was his friend, because Ainsworth was the more popular author of his time. Although his work really hasn't stood the test of time, he outsold Dickens. He outsold the Dickens out of Dickens. He was very popular in his day. One of the stories, most of it takes place here at Ordsall Hall, about Guy Fawkes staying here at Ordsall Hall, and Catesby has a love affair with Viviana Radcliffe, a fictional character. She's not one of the actual Radcliffes of Ordsall Hall. I can't remember the story, you'll have to forgive me. It's a really terrible, terrible book. It's not good writing, and it's a lot of it's made up. A lot of the history is made up. Of course, Guy Fawkes probably never was in Manchester. It's possible, but unlikely. It's the 19th century petrol station. Where do you start in a place like this? There's so much to see here. Aha! Guy Fawkes was here. Ainsworth's novel about Guy Fawkes is only slightly more accurate than the movie Braveheart. In 1841, Edgar Allan Poe wrote in a review of the work that it was positively beneath criticism and beneath contempt. He went on to say the design of Mr. Ainsworth has been to fill for a certain sum of money a stipulated number of pages. Ainsworth's novel transformed Fawkes into an acceptable fictional character, and Fawkes subsequently began to appear in children's books and penny dreadfuls. If you've ever heard of the notorious highwayman Dick Turpin, it's because of Harrison Ainsworth's novel Rockwood. Dick Turpin was an unknown and forgotten story until Ainsworth told it. His novel about Guy Fawkes is filled with inaccuracies and fiction. However, it is also filled with a lot of factual information. He used actual transcripts of Fawkes' trial for the latter part of the novel, which is why people believe the story of Guy Fawkes in what we now call Greater Manchester. The Radcliffes, well, of course, everyone was Catholic at one time. Well, not everyone, but all the Christians were all Catholics at one time. But this would have been the type of place you would put a priest hole. But it's a bit obvious, isn't it? Up in the attic, a bit obvious. Priest holes were a lot cleverer than that, but they did use the attic for sure. There is a little hidden space behind here. And you can see there's a fireplace in there. So what they would do is try and measure how big this space should be, and then measure how big it is. But that's really difficult to do, isn't it? Like, we have this wall here, but who's to say that's not the end of the building? And if you punch through this wall, and you find this wall, who's to say that's not the exterior wall? It's difficult to know. But as I said, there were much cleverer hiding places for priests than the attic. Sir John Radcliffe was a Catholic and a Catholic sympathizer, so there were probably priest holes in a place like this. And that's how the Guy Fawkes story starts, with the execution of two priests next to Manchester Cathedral. And that would probably be why Ainsworth chose Ordsall Hall, because of the known Catholic sympathies at the time. But this place is absolutely amazing, fantastic building. You need to get here and check it out if you can, if you're ever in Salford. And a lot of the story takes place here at Ordsall Hall. But of course, it's all made up.